So the women are far less murderous than men, aren't they?
Just as I drink my tea,
Yeah.
ask me a question.
Were you choked to death?
Yeah, by a long shot. So, I mean, there's about 15 currently serving life for murder in the Irish prison service, and it would be comparison to, I think, around 350 male. So it's a huge difference. Yeah. It's a massive difference.
So women don't really kill too often, or certainly maybe they get away with it more, I don't know. The ones who are in custody obviously have not got away with it. And when it comes to serving justice, man, woman or beast all get a life sentence for murder. It's mandatory. Ruth Lawrence is the reason we sort of dipped in to have a look at who else is serving, who are Ireland's other lifer women. And Ruth Lawrence, you covered the trial, has been found guilty of killing Anthony Keegan and Eoin O'Connor in 2014. Really strange, because this was a gangland killing over a drug debt. And she was obviously involved with a partner at the time who is expected to be returned from South Africa whenever he finishes another sentence for a very violent crime out there. But Ruth Lawrence has been in custody for some time, so she settled in really into the system.
Well, she's
is it the Docus?
She's in. Generally, when they're on remand, it would be more than likely the Docus, but it can be Limerick as well. I mean, they're the only two women's female wings,
right.
Well, the Docus is a full prison in itself, but there's a female wing then in Limerick. So you would have a couple of, I think there's 3 lifers in Limerick, and presumably then the rest are in the Docus.
And the Docus is, from memory when it was opened, I remember going in to see John Lonergan and getting a bit of a tour of it. And it is sort of an apartment complex nearly. And the women it was a kind of a response really to holding females in custody because of the elements that they might have. Some of them might go into custody pregnant, some of them might have small children. So it's a kind of a, I suppose, less stark way of keeping them in custody. It's also got a lot of jobs and courses they can do and a little bit more freedom, would I be right than the men?
And a lot of it was because it was more what they call a kind of nuisance crime, like, persistent shoplifters, people with serious addiction issues, as opposed to outright violence, compared to, there'd be a lot more men, obviously, convicted of violence, whether it's assault or a sexual assault or, manslaughter, lots of things below murder. Whereas the women's, the vast majority of those going into custody are for non-violent crime. So I think it was the idea to recognise that there needed to be a different regime. But I think now the issue is that there are increasing numbers of women serving time. I mean, we did something similar like this back in 2020, and obviously because people are in life, they don't get released. So, the numbers are always increasing. But again, it's nothing close to what the men are in terms of the men.
And how would you describe Ruth Lawrence as a killer?
Well, I mean, she's at the upper end of it. I mean, the jury accepted the evidence that she shot a man, and then he was finished off by her partner. And, it was accepted that, she was part of the whole plan, like a cold-blooded plan to lure these 2 men, Eoin O'Connor and Anthony Keegan, down to Cavan from Dublin on the pretext that they were going to get paid money for drugs that had gone missing. And instead they were shot and their bodies wrapped up and dumped on an island. So there was a clear amount of kind of intent both before and after the event. And, there was evidence that she was quite happy. That even showing off her gun, it was one of the witnesses talked about, she was very happy what it was doing for her. So she seemed to get a thrill out of it. And she certainly kind of, anyone we've heard from outside the court, have referred to her as kind of as mentally tough, and that she's quite hard.
And there was a sense that she was involved with some Christian ministry before she was certainly returned to Ireland in South Africa. Is there a sense she was living a particular lifestyle back in 2014 with a guy who's now in prison for a very violent kidnap? And did he kill the young lad?
Yeah, no, he did. He's serving. He's doing 15 years for his part in this kidnap and torture of a couple of teenagers who were supposed to have stolen a mobile phone from the shop, which it turns out apparently they didn't. And imprisoned them overnight and poisoned them. And one of them died as a result of that. So there was 4 men, and Neville van der Westhuizen was one of these 4 men that were charged in connection with that. So, I mean, they're going to, they have said that they're going to renew the extradition proceedings as soon as he's available, from the prisons in South Africa. So whether he's eligible, I think, in 2027 for parole. So if they give him parole so he can be extradited, or otherwise they have to wait till 2035, which is when his sentence will finish. But by all accounts, there's a determination there is to bring him back to face trial.
It was hard enough to kind of dig into the psyche of Ruth Lawrence, what made her tick. She certainly was living a lifestyle with him. You know, they were living up outside Dublin. They were obviously drug dealing. They were mixing in certain circles.
Yeah,
taking cocaine.
And we heard a bit more about the lifestyle in South Africa, you know, that they were both kind of on the tattoo circuit, and that she was considered quite good and sought after, and you know, she was earning the equivalent of €250 a day, which was, you know, huge money in South Africa by South African standards, such as her prowess as a tattoo artist. But she was moving about and kind of in the cash economy and trying to stay off the grid. She was using the name Lawless, ironically enough, instead of Lawrence. But, you know, at the same time, while she was accused, she never took the stand. And so we might hear more at the sentencing when she is actually given her life sentence on December 8th.
One thing I suppose didn't really kind of emerge about Ruth Lawrence, her family here in Ireland and where she's from. And like, was she always kind of attracted to that lifestyle and that bad boy that the boyfriend was, or was it something that changed in her?
Well, I mean, she went to school like in North Dublin, like a normal school. You know, lived in Clontarf, grew up there. There wasn't any, you know, she never came to the attention of the guards. But by the time like she was involved with this and Ballyjames stuff, she was hooked up with a pretty serious bad boy or wannabe bad boy. You know, and they were playing around with guns. They were, you know, connected into you know, a serious gangster, like, you know, who was, you know, possibly kind of set up these two guys for this fall. Well, certainly one of them, and I think, you know, very much Anthony Keegan was just the unlucky bystander who went down with it. Who basically went on the trip with his childhood pal just to try and look after him a bit, and unfortunately it cost him his life.
It's unusual, isn't it? Because most of the time, people we'd be looking at or writing about or talking about, if they're involved in organised crime and drug dealing, they can have this complete whole other life, which is their family life, and a lot of them will completely keep their wives, their partners, their families away from what they do. So it is quite unusual for a woman to be actively involved with the man in that world. Yeah,
it is unusual. Like, I mean, there's nothing, like, there isn't actually a comparison, really, you know. I mean, you have, say, for instance, Regina Keogh is she's serving a life sentence for her role in the Gareth Hutch murder. And she's one of 10 people, you know, linked to the Hutch-Kinahan feud that are serving life sentences now, or certainly serving time for murders. And she was basically persuaded by her brother to get a friend to let them use the apartment. So Jonathan Keogh and Thomas Fox used this flat in Cumberland Street, and it's from there that they launched their attack on Gareth Hutch in 2016. So even then, you know, although she's part of a group, she had a relatively minor role, but at the same time, you know, it's considered joint enterprise, and that kind of analogy they say. It
certainly was. I think that I was actually there for her, you know, when she was found guilty of murder at that time, and she was a mother of 5 kids. Jonathan and Regina Keogh's brother had been murdered. Was he Michael Keogh? He had been murdered actually in an underground car park in Dublin. Was actually part of the Hutch-Kinahan feud, and he was one of the very few, if not the only, kind of individual seen to be on the Kinahan side of things. But Justice Tony Hunt, who was sentencing her, he almost, I think he had no option because there was only one charge before him, which was murder. Did the law change after that, and other, you know, she could have faced a different charge? Was it just murder at that stage? I think it was 2017, was it, when she was before the courts?
Well, I know, like, in the Ruth Lawrence case, that there was an application brought to bring like a secondary charge of assisting an offender, but that was seen as a fallback, and the jury were told. There was also Justice Hunt in that case, and he told the jury, you know, look, that's specifically a fallback. If you can't reach a verdict on murder, you have this then option then to, you know, find her guilty of assisting an offender. So I'm not sorry, I can't answer you about. I'm not sure if there was a change in law, but you can bring
something like that at the time, because I think actually, and you have the quotes there that Justice Tony Hunt actually said to Regina Keogh that she'd otherwise lived a blameless life, and that she was unfortunate to receive the same sentence as the two men, one being her brother Jonathan Keogh and the other being Thomas Fox. Now, since then, Nicky McConnell has also been found guilty of murder. Is there 5 in total that were
It's four in that one.
4 in that one.
As I know. Yeah.
And then,
there was no women involved in the other one, so I can't remember.
Yeah.
Like but there's, and then of course there's the Gary Hutch's killer in Spain is serving time over there as well.
James Quinn.
James Quinn.
Yeah. So Regina Keogh is, and she's. I noticed there the other day, I think it was on our own website, SundayWorld.com, her brother Jonathan is now going to be in the same prison as her.
That's right, yeah. So
they wouldn't ever, ne'er the twain shall meet, I presume.
No, I mean, the only way it will happen would be as if it was a regular screened visit. So one of them will be in the a visiting booth or whatever, as if they're coming from the outside to meet the other person who's still in custody, if it's requested and if it's granted. So we've no idea. I mean, if it does happen.
Do they ever even have a kind of a social evening or anything like that?
No. I mean, like Jonathan Keogh is on the D wing, as far as I understand, in Limerick, which is it's the isolation wing. It's where Jonathan Dowdall was held before he entered the witness security program, and where Barbie Kadassian was held before she was released for the threatening to kill her mother, and of course Freddie was there recently as well. But so it's not a wing where you're going to be mixing with anyone. Like you're behind the door for quite a long time. In
a way, the nearest one to Ruth Lawrence would probably be Rose Lynch, who was seen as a kind of jihadi Jane, wasn't she, when she took up arms, and she committed in 2011. 2011, David Darcy was killed. She was a dissident Republican, and it was said in the court case that he was wrongly identified as being a member of the dissidents. He was a milkman, I think.
He was a delivery van driver for a butcher's business, and he was wrongly identified as being involved in the murder of a continuity IRA man, Liam Kenny. And she was the only person now who was prosecuted in relation to that killing, but she didn't act alone. And the story was that she was besotted her, and she was in love with another man who had a long record of dissident Republican activity, and that he was involved. But it was, it was described as a premeditated, calculated, and cold-blooded murder, made even worse by the fact that they killed a completely innocent man. And she's in prison now, like from 2011, and to be in her case, she's I think 63 now.
Yeah,
so she's a long time,
and she has grandchildren and had at least 3 children at the time she was sentenced to life in prison. She's also a daughter of Tiny Joe Lynch of Limerick Continuity IRA, certainly sympathiser, and would have been brought up in a real staunchly Republican household. She had, the reason I think she got the Jihadi Jane nickname was because she had a list of names that she carried around in her handbag that she was going to assassinate.
So, I mean, look, she's certainly committed to the cause, and I mean, a lot of that stems from her father, Tiny Lynch, who I think you interviewed him one time. You had a kind of a bit of a whatever
side of the road,
a doorstep
chat.
Kind of chit chat, and you got that. You got a certain insight, I suppose, into his commitment to the cause.
It was after she had been jailed for life, and it was so unusual to see a woman, getting convicted of murder, really. And he spoke about her. I thought he was going to feel very bad that his daughter was going to prison for life and was going to leave her own children and later, have no, proper normal life with her grandchildren, etc. But he was proud of her.
Yeah.
And he said she was very committed. And
he called her iconic, wasn't it?
Yes.
And he was proud as well. And he got a prison sentence since then as well for his own part of involvement in dissident Republican activities, which I think he's...
And he must be in his 80s then.
It would be, yeah.
She's 63.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'll let you go back to your own list there because I jumped around a bit on you there.
That's
so
quite all right.
Who's TG?
Well, this is a case that was being heard at the same time as Ruth Lawrence was going on. So there was actually some of the TV journalists were trying to cover both by popping in and out of the one we were sitting in, Ruth Lawrence, and they come up and ask us what's going on. And we'd ask them, obviously, how things are going in that case. So, I mean, there was an incredibly horrific case. This woman, she was on trial for killing her partner's 4-year-old son. Now, nobody can be named in this. There was a court application made. And they were 4 days into the trial. And it was disturbing evidence by all accounts. The child had injuries that were likened to having been in a road accident. There was sort of, covered in bruising and there was brain bleeds, so on. So I mean, but there were 4 days into it, and there was another child's statement was read out, and after that, she changed her plea to guilty. So she too will be facing a life sentence, the mandatory life sentence. But it's one of those. It's one of those horrible cases. Now that particular lady's been in prison already. When I say already, she's been in prison as a result of this case since last year. So she has been held in custody. So it'll be backdated to sometime last year.
And
she went in.
Did she have children of her own?
I don't know.
Those two children were the partners.
No, it was
the child that died and the one that was giving witness.
Her partner is the child's father, and serving time for again assisting an offender.
Okay.
In relation to this.
Okay.
And the child's mother, it was mentioned in court, did have psychiatric issues, which is why the father had the child.
And how would somebody like TG, as we'll call her, be treated in custody by the other woman?
Well, I imagine your guess is as good as mine in that, and I'll imagine that she will end up in a prison where she can be held in isolation, that she won't be necessarily mixing with other people. I mean, the case is very similar, if you remember, with Karen Harrington, which isn't that long ago either. And she's in prison since May 22. She's 41, and she was convicted of killing two-year-old Santina Cawley at their Cork apartment in 2019. And that again was a horrific, really horrible kind of case. I mean, there was basically a gap of 2 hours when she was left alone with the child. The father had gone out to look for his cousin for some reason, and he left her from 3 a.m. and he was back at 5 a.m. and the child was naked on a soiled blanket, and again had multiple fractures, bruises, abrasions. Dr. Mary Bolster, in her evidence, says that she absolutely believed the injuries are non-accidental. The child was declared dead in Cork University Hospital. And Karen Harrington, denied the charges. He said she couldn't remember what happened, and the prosecution called this a donut account, in that there was a big hole in the middle, and obviously again that she was the only person in the apartment with the child, and these injuries couldn't have been self-inflicted or caused by an accident. So the jury, found her guilty.
Now, Karen Harrington and others are kind of the other side of their 40s, but Nikita Byrne stands out because she's only 21 and she is serving a life sentence as well.
Yeah, and I suppose, again, this is another one from this year. So, in terms of the convictions, I mean, you've three women going into who'll be starting their life sentences this year. Which, is, what is it? It would be a 25% increase in the number of lifers just this year alone. And in her case, they were convicted of it was in the summer of 2023, June 23, she and her boyfriend, or fellow she was with, Alan Vile, they killed a man called Robin Wilkins. And they seemed to have, there was in the court, it was this description of a very chaotic kind of lifestyle. Now she was 16 years younger than Vile, and on the morning of the killing had something like 6 cans of beer, but for breakfast. And then the victim kind of called to them, and they went around different pubs drinking. And at some point there was a row in the car that I think Wilkins took exception to Vile, criticising the way he was driving or something, and punched him a number of times. And then at some point, then Wilkins was hit with a rock on the head, and they had a good think about what they were going to do, and drove up to the car park at these cliffs in County Donegal. It's Slieve League, and they eventually they threw the rock over, and they threw him over as well. Now they did stop to pick his pockets as well. And they were caught shortly afterwards. I mean, there wasn't a whole.
There's not a clear motivation in that. It's a chaotic lifestyle, a lot of drink involved, and a row breaks out. When it comes to land and wills and things like that, you can often see crimes occurring. Sometimes fraud. Sometimes people are threatened. But in the case of Helen Jones, 58 years of age, and serving life in prison for killing her brother.
Yeah, so I mean, this one, like this would have happened back in 2019, and it was a row over a family home, like a modest enough house in Cork, and like in Cork City, and so her brother Paul Jones, 56, himself and his other brother Liam had been left the house by their father that she was basically she could live in it until she got married. Was the way Helen could stay there in the house until she was married. And so there was kind of, they disagreed. I suppose it was a bit of an anachronistic type of will, and they agreed a settlement, and that she would move out and be paid €50,000. But then on a particular evening, herself and her partner arrived at the house of a separate house where Paul was living, and they turned up in a taxi. There's a couple of witnesses. They saw, a man lying on the ground with blood. He was stabbed 25 times. Like, she was in her dressing gown. They got back into the taxi, went home. He was hit over the head with a machete-like object as well.
So the taxi driver sat there while they went in and killed him, and then they came out, hopped in the back, and
and there was blood. There was blood found in the taxi as well. I mean, in fairness to the taxi driver, I don't think he had any idea necessarily what was going on. But I mean, that was.
Wasn't very clever, was it?
It wasn't the most thought out. But I mean, again, it suggests of a chaotic lifestyle. I mean, in that. Like, she had 47 convictions, like, previously, including for assault, theft and arson. And her partner, who was also done for life as well, Keith O'Hara, he had previous convictions. He had 39 in total. So, like, these again, are people who are kind of, I suppose, at that kind of that a demographic who just seems to be constant offending, and it escalated to this point. So obviously they were seething over the idea of, losing the house, or as they saw it, and that, the brothers weren't entitled to it. So whatever way the row escalated. And he was described, like, the brother I didn't think was necessarily expecting it. He was kind of seen at the front of the house, and, when she called, and he was in his boxer shorts, and he was chatting to them amicably enough, and they went inside. So initially it didn't seem like it was going to be any kind of nasty confrontation in that sense, but of course, he was killed.
Often in the cases where women are accused of killing, in particular their partners, in their defence, they will say that they have been subjected to, domestic abuse and violence themselves in the course of the relationship. And Paula Farrell, who was convicted of stabbing her partner to death, she did actually bring this up, that she was provoked.
Yeah, I mean, this is one from Louth. Sorry, and it was 2018. She stabbed her partner to death, and Wayne McQuillan is his name, and she tried to claim that he had sexually assaulted her and began to strangle her with his hands after she refused to have sex with him. Now, she was a mother of three. She stabbed him. He was stabbed 4 times. He staggered out of the house covered in blood, and passing teenagers were told not to call an ambulance. So even though she's been in custody since 2018, I think even before she was fully convicted, she'd been allowed out of prison on different occasions for family reasons and things like that.
Is she in the Docus or Limerick?
No, I think, as far as I understand, she'd be in the Docus. There's only 2 or 3 of them in Limerick of the lifers. Okay. Again, partly because it's one of the places where you can hold people kind of in isolation.
Marta Herda, a really recognisable name, was initially in custody here, but she's now been transferred to Poland, where she will serve out her life sentence.
Yeah, I mean, that was an unusual one. I mean, basically using a car as a murder weapon. So, I mean, this is a man, I have to apologies now for not being properly able to pronounce the name, but I presume it's Kaba Orsas. And he would have been working with her, I think. They were both kind of in the hospitality trade, and he'd always kind of... I think he'd spent a couple of times, romantically trying to pursue her without any great success, sending her texts and phoning and all this kind of stuff. And she wasn't that interested. And what she did was she drove off for whatever reasons. She drove off into the harbour at Arklow, and only her side of the window was open, and she'd already established that he couldn't swim and drove into the harbour, and he drowned. She survived.
So she was essentially trying to make it look like an accident.
Exactly. Yeah. And she lost her appeal as well. I mean, she was. You kind of. I think there was this idea that she was in fear of him. And that somehow that he was some kind of a stalker, but it seems like there was more to it, and that Ken Foy had an interesting story at the time that she had actually taunted the investigating guards by sending a bizarre postcard from Poland with a penny coin attached to it, because she was actually out on bail, so she seemed pretty confident that she was going to get away with it. And it read, "Keep up the good work. Wish you were here. Hope you catch the killer." But they actually then decided to investigate this postcard, and they found out that her DNA was on the stamp that had been sent, and they've no idea why she was doing this. But it felt maybe it was kind of some way of showing that she was cleverer than them, or that she was the boss. So so it shows you there's an element of callousness, and I mean obviously to drive into a harbour where you're risking your own life isn't the actions of a. And was there any money and
motivation there? Just he was annoying her because he kept sending her texts and asking her out.
No, it seemed to be. Look, it seemed to be no particular reason really from a rational point of view. That
just leave him unread would be another way of doing it.
Well, there would be, yeah. So he had actually spent 2 years following her and phoning her and sending her messages. That he was besotted with her, and she said that they were constantly arguing about this, relationship as it was, and that they were arguing, in the car over this. But I think it was they kind of found that there wasn't really a relationship, and that he had been unsuccessfully pursuing her. So. Like she did say to the guards, like he was dead because of his love for her, and she said it was 24 hours a day, this kind of contact from him, and that she couldn't take it anymore, and that was her excuse for killing him.
Rita O'Driscoll is an interesting character, and you would wonder, in that this crime occurred just after she was discharged from a psychiatric hospital. I was talking to Pat O'Connell in relation to psychiatric hospitals and committing people and keeping them in and all that. It's a very grey area, and no doubt people are only released when it's believed they are, in no longer a danger to themselves or anybody else, and medical advice is sought before anybody is released. But unfortunately, Rita O'Driscoll clearly appeared calm and coherent, but was far from it, and was on a mission to kill her ex-partner.
Yeah, well, we don't know that, to be honest. She had been, she killed her ex, Timmy Foley. It was in October 2018. Now, she had been in hospital the previous month, and there was evidence given that, when she left the hospital, she was calm and coherent, and, she wasn't suffering any kind of symptoms of mental illness. And she went to her ex's house, not to her ex's house, but to his brother's house, Jason Foley, where I think Timmy was staying at the time. And Jason was himself a kind of a vulnerable person. He'd suffered a head injury, and he had a panic button on him, to raise the alarm if he needed any kind of assistance in any way. So she turned up at the house, and they had something to eat, and there was, I think, alcohol taken. And then at some point they were worried, Jason was worried about the noise that she was making that was going to upset the neighbours, and Timmy had said, look, don't worry, just even ask her to be quiet. And next minute he sees her, as he called it, pucking him in the stomach, and then realising that her fist was covered in blood and she was stabbing him. And he was actually stabbed 28 times, and Jason Foley himself then was attacked, and he suffered serious stab wounds as well, but survived. And she kind of inflicted some wounds on herself and tried to say that basically she had been attacked first. She came out with she told Gardaí her ex was satanic, and that it was his knife, and that she was suffering from battered wife syndrome. It was a really gruesome attack. And again, if somebody's been in a psychiatric ward for a month, I suppose adding alcohol to whatever medication someone is on, or even if it's a serious psychiatric condition, if that's not being medicated, alcohol isn't going to help things.
We're going to come back for part 2, and a particularly gruesome killing that saw Sabrina Cummins committed to life in prison. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.